Hello. Is this good? Too loud? Too quiet? Perfect. Thank you so much. Oh my god. Thank you so much for leaving such a gorgeous day outside to come and join us for this book fringe event with Anna Chapman Parker. I am so excited to listen on this event. Thank you so much for coming over. So the way that the event will go is that Anna will chat with you guys for about 30 minutes, then there will be a 15-minute Q&A. We know that people obviously kind of like, it's fringe, people have shows to get to, so if you need to duck out early, that's perfectly fine, no worries. Yeah, yeah, but yeah, I'll just read Anna's bio and then we'll hand over to you. So, Anna Chapman Parker is an artist, writer and teacher whose work explores relationships between drawing, writing, body and place. Her exhibitions and commissions include projects for Edinburgh Art Festival, the University of Glasgow, Campoline and commonroom.co. She has taught drawing at the Royal College of Art, the Futures Institute and in Weedy Car Parks. Her writing has appeared in journals from MAP, MAP, and A Happy Hypocrite to Resurgence and Ecologist. Understorey is her first book. Anna studied at the University of Edinburgh and the University of Arts London. She lives in Northumberland. Everyone, if you'll put your hands together and welcome Anna Chapman Parker.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mohammed, and thank you everyone for coming. I know it's a really wonderful choice this time of year, so really lovely to see you. And thank you for hosting me to the Lighthouse Bookshop. This is just such a stellar bookshop. I'm sure many of you are really familiar with it. I used to live in Edinburgh, and I remember this bookshop really well over the years since studying here. So it's a real thrill to be here to read. So I've been asked to talk for about 30 minutes. I don't know about you guys, I would struggle to hold focus for that long, so I brought some visual aids here. Also being a nerd, I've brought some notes because I don't want to ramble too much. So I hope you'll forgive me checking my notes in a nerdy fashion. Yeah, I thought maybe I'd just very briefly describe the book for anyone who won't be familiar. My book is most obviously about weeds, by which I mean those common, wild and prolific plants that we find cropping up in our neighbourhoods. And I use the word neutrally. I think it's actually a really useful word to reclaim in a neutral way, because a lot of these plants, we could say wildflowers, sure, but things like nettles, sure they do flower, but people don't think of them as wildflowers. And I think actually, if we use the word weeds and we use it neutrally or positively, then it's a good way of actually just making a quiet point to begin with, that words, just putting into question immediately the idea of the value that we consign through our language. So it's about weeds, but it's also very much a book about looking. And I'm sure many of you will, like me, find that these days it's getting harder and harder to look at anything for a length of time. I think it's always been hard, but because the mind wants to move on, right, or describe with language, but actually to look at something and hold your attention on something for a sustained period for more than a few seconds is actually surprisingly hard. Taken with swiping past things ever more quickly, apparently. And what links these two things, or what linked them for me when I thought about this becoming a book, was I guess the idea of questioning the generally accepted hierarchies of what's worthy of our attention. So what's interesting, what's worthy of looking at in that way, and that connects for me very much with the concerns about the attention economy and with ideas of, I guess, this extractive capitalism in terms of value and how we use our time or how our attention is being manipulated. So I guess an underlying theme in the book, although I'm not sort of necessarily writing about it all the time, I do talk a little bit about digital culture and its impact on certainly my experiences of looking. But I think an underlying theme again is this idea of as an act of resistance, in terms of just actually being active about how we choose to use our attention. So for me, setting out to write this book involved setting out to follow these plants, these weeds, over the course of a year in a really intentional way. My book is half text, half images, as you may have seen. And the images, is this coming over okay with the microphone? It's always hard to tell when you're on this side, isn't it? So the images are half drawings, my own line drawings. If I flick through, you can kind of get an idea of the ratio. And alongside my own drawings are artworks by others who've looked at these same plants over the centuries. So the oldest artwork in the book, let's put that back, is a 6th century bramble from a manuscript in Constantinople. Incidentally, one of the earliest images that we know of to have been commissioned by a woman, which is another really interesting thing about it, by a princess, a Roman princess or equivalent. And that's a bramble in a manuscript that was used as a medical textbook, which is a really phenomenal image. And the most recent images by other artists in the book are probably the contemporary photographer Dima Cholkachov, who's a Ukrainian photographer, and he's done a really beautiful and very poignant series, I think it's ongoing actually, of weeds coming through bullet holes and shrapnel damage in the current Ukraine conflict. So yeah, a really kind of wide variety of artworks by others, but I think this connecting thread of these consistent shapes and forms of these plants over centuries was something that I certainly found really captivating, because you've got these artworks that come from really disparate times and places, and a lot of the cultural specificity in the artwork, if it's an Italian Renaissance painting, for example, might feel quite irrelevant to some of us, but then that familiarity in those plants is something, that sense of continuity across time is something I found actually really moving and really inspiring. So, yeah, let's move on to the plants. So I thought what I would do to sort of give myself, and hopefully you listening, a bit of structure and idea of the time, is I would talk about 5 or 6 plants, maybe 5 plants, and through each one, touch on a few themes that come up in the book. So the first one I thought, it's a little bit broken off, but this is the one, I don't know if you're familiar with this. This is, I'm sure some of you are, ivy-leaved toe flax. And it doesn't really grow out of the ground like that. It sort of creeps, it clings into the cracks of cement in walls. So the Latin name Cimbalaria muralis, muralis is off the wall, right? So it loves the kind of those conditions of a sort of cementy crack. The kind of conditions that a lot of weeds love are, incredibly sort of. Almost all of them are from my own garden, so they haven't been sprayed or peed on, whatever. So just, pass it on if you don't want to. So yeah, this plant, the earliest record of it coming to the UK is I think the 17th century, and it's thought to have arrived into the UK in a box containing some marble statues from Italy. So it's really a Mediterranean plant originally. It loves those kind of arid, stony conditions. And so yeah, this museum or Oxford College opened up these statues. Seeds were set free into the ether, I guess, or carried along on somebody's boot soles, and it quickly became known as Oxford weed. And it's a really stunning plant. You probably passed it. We all probably passed it without noticing it on the way up here, because, as I say, it's a feature of urban walls almost anywhere throughout Britain, certainly throughout England and southern Scotland. And I think, I think it's a nice one to kind of introduce one of the core ideas in the book of the accessibility and the ubiquity of these plants. So a lot of us feel, if we're living in urban areas, as I am, we're often a little bit starved of nature a lot of the time, or we're confined to urban commutes and so on. But one of the really lovely things about these plants from a human perspective is that, it's a way of tapping into kind of a little micro wildness in the everyday, which I think is really can become really interesting. So, you know, in a really busy and affluent area like a city centre here, it is harder to find plants, particularly now when a lot of grass has been covered over with festival flooring and things, understandably. But they are here, and often in really interesting little back streets or behind utilitarian places. So I'll maybe read a short extract about this plant in that context. Hoping my bookmarks haven't fallen out. It's amazing how difficult it is to remember where things are in your own book. So I should say as well, just briefly, that the book's structured over a calendar year, which has become quite a trope. But I thought long and hard about it, and I thought actually that is a really useful thing to do, because we all know that lots of beautiful stuff will be flowering in the summer and spring. But it's actually really lovely to think about what's happening throughout the year. So in the winter, what's still coming up, or what's drying in a really interesting way, what's dying in a really interesting and beautiful and useful way in terms of seed heads and things. So I thought actually on balance it is a useful structural device. So this extract's from 30th of November. At the back of the high shops, where bins are emptied, trolleys packed with broken down cardboard, and the lorries unload their deliveries, odd angles of yard that won't tessellate into use fill up with rusty stems of curly dock. A plot never quite confirmed for redevelopment has been colonised by willow herb, plants taking the initiative where no investor would. A nearby ramp, bollarded to prevent access, furs over with moss. Behind the library car park and down a cut-through slope, tumbles of weeds and receipts collect together as if in sympathy with each other's unwantedness. Fallen pylons of shepherd's purse, bark scraps, pennycress, and corrugations of leaf and litter lift quietly from the tarmac. In a narrow alley that leads back to the high street, small strands of toadflax creep, relishing the damp. So that maybe sets the scene of some of the weedier parts of town where I spend a lot of time slightly sheepishly and initially, and then eventually completely brazenly making drawings. Moving on to the next plant. I'm certainly no expert, but I'm told by dandelion experts that there are like hundreds of species of dandelion. Nothing. Wow, really? Is that right? Hundreds? Thousands? Hundreds?
Something like that, but they're technically
Microspecies, thank you. Yeah. So I thought this was a particularly good one to bring along because it's lovely and big and a little bit sort of spiky along here, but I'm sure you're all familiar with this as a smaller plant, the dandelion leaf. So something I should say that's really important for me, in the writing of the book I made myself some rules that we all need some sort of things, if only to kick against and break them, right? And one of my key things is that all the drawings I made for the book I made in situ, so where the plants were found, where they're growing. And that was really important to me for several reasons. I think a key one is I was trying to learn about the plants through drawing them. My background is as an artist. I studied at Edinburgh College of Art here, and then did a master's in drawing. So that's my background is visual. I don't have botanical expertise. And if you draw something in the place where it's found, your whole body will assist you with getting to know information about that plant. Partly, of course, unconsciously. So if you're kneeling down on the ground and your leg gets damp, well, it's probably likes that kind of more moist environment, or if you're getting stung by a nettle, all these things kind of give you information. If you're craning your neck, it's to do with the height and all that. So your body's kind of feeding in smell, scent, all the sound, all of that. And another really important thing is that when you get still to draw, quite quickly the wildlife will stop caring about you and will kind of emerge, right? So you're kneeling down and insect life will kind of gradually appear. And I think it's partly that also you tune in, so you're also becoming more aware of what's there. So that's really interesting, seeing what pollinators are connected with that plant, things like that, and what birds might be using it to land on or get the seed and things like that. And a third reason was more personal, and that was to do with urgency. So if you take a plant back to your studio, I don't think there's any, problem with picking your dandelion leaf, but if you take it back to your studio, there's no urgency to get that down on paper. You can sort of get comfortable, mess around, maybe check your emails every now and again, or if you mess up, start again, all of that. But if you draw something when you've found it out and about, you've got time pressure, and you've got things that you've got to get onto, you've got the weather, it's probably going to rain, right? We're in Britain. You've got your hunger levels, all of that, your discomfort, you're probably like a little bit stiff or awkwardly perched or self-conscious. And that is brilliant for kind of focusing the mind, right? That kind of urgency. So I found that a really useful kind of rule for myself, and that's why I made all the drawings, bar one, which I explained why, where the plants were found. So maybe I'll do another quick reading about this one here. Thank you. You already know down the line. It's quite nice to just touch something that we're thinking about. And another thing about writing about the plants where they're found is that I could, I guess, be more personal about the encounters. So my book I wouldn't describe it as a memoir. It's not really about me. Quite a boring life. I didn't want to write a book about myself. But I am writing about the things I'm writing about in terms of them being part of life. So, as I said, I'm not a botanist. Although I have an art education, I didn't want to write academically about drawing either. I wanted to write about drawing as part of life and how I use drawing and how drawing connects with other stuff going on in your head or other kind of things to do with how we connect with things and how we respond. So it was important that I wrote, as an individual, as a person, and sometimes that means, just being upfront about when it didn't work out. There are just as many days, however, when I can't seem to connect. When I stand in front of a weedy mass and feel too heavy to bring pen to paper and have to remind myself again that what I produce doesn't really matter. The point is not to produce a good drawing, only to be there and look. For a short interval, I'm putting aside everything else, all obligations and anxieties of work, of parenthood, of domestic life, and worrying only at this triangular problem between plant, eye and paper. So that's the kind of movement of drawing, isn't it? It's that shape. Many of you here draw or find yourself doing sometimes. This morning I head out weary and lacking conviction in what I'm doing. I stop and look at the budding bank. The visual information makes no impression, like an uninked print. No optical kick to get me started. Well, okay, just begin. No need to work out a composition or arrange the shapes on the page. Start anywhere, wherever the eye and pen fall. 2 new dandelions emerging, toothed spirals a couple of inches wide. A simple task. Faint pleasure starts to seep in as I work their medieval zigzag. Dent de lion, lion tooth. A shape represented in artworks for centuries, perhaps millennia. My mind wanders to past incarnations of this shape, to a childhood book, to an idea for a salad. Heading back, everything has shifted slightly, as if turned into focus, tuned into focus. Line and shape spring out of the thicket of weeds in the verge, lighting up strings of messages written in grass. I can feel my eyeballs darting. So I'm sure some of you who draw, or perhaps have another practice that connects with the concentration of drawing, can relate to that thing of beginning a little bit all over the place, and then as you begin, even if you begin feeling very disconnected, that kind of focus sort of gathers you into yourself, and you start to kind of tune in. Your awareness kind of tunes in. An incredibly useful practice for that, particularly if you struggle with things like meditation, as I do. Well, who doesn't struggle with meditation? Anyway, I mentioned that amongst my own drawings, I write about other people's artworks, and I can just show you a nice small space. Imagine this blue. It's a cyanotype by Anna Atkins. I'm sure some of you know her work. She was a photographic pioneer, the first woman photographer to make a book of photographs, actually. This is 1854, and it's in the V&A, this one here. So I've written about this artwork here in the book. Maybe I'll skip that one and go to ragwort. So ragwort, Senecchio jacobea. So it's probably clear, and I'm sure a lot of you will share my enthusiasm for these plants, right? And allowing them to thrive where possible or where appropriate. But even for those who are aesthetically uninterested in our communities, I think a really easy argument in favour of them is their benefit to pollinators, which we all know are declining at alarming levels. So this here, again from my back garden, this plant, ragwort, is probably one of the more vilified, unpopular weeds, and it does have some issues for farmers. So I mean, the thing about weeds and managing them, it's obviously even if you're completely obsessed as I am, it's a nuanced topic, right? I wouldn't advocate growing a bunch of foxgloves in the nursery playground. They're too inviting for small fingers. But I think this is a really interesting plant, particularly probably something you know much more about than me, but it's incredibly beneficial to wildlife. So I'll just read a little bit about this one. So this entry is from 14th of September. You can see ragwort, most places is going over now, so it's going to seed. You get those kind of fluffy white seed heads. In fact, the Latin name, Senecchio jacobea, Senecchio is old man, so that's the fluffy white seed heads are kind of like a guy losing his hair, I guess, with white fluffy hair kind of thing. The names are brilliant, aren't they? You get so much from the names. I've been putting off drawing ragwort and assumed my unconscious aversion to the plant was due to its reputation as a toxic nuisance. Ragwort is well known as poisonous to cattle, and though its bitter taste means grazing livestock instinctively avoid it, it can harm them if the cut and dried plants get mixed up with their feed. Visually, there's a harshness about its striking acrid yellow. It doesn't seem to blend easily with other wildflowers, but stands stiffly apart. Stems are quite rigid if you feel them when you go around. A tough plant is also difficult to uproot, so if you don't want it in your garden, it's one of the hard, it's kind of more awkward to pull up. And as it turns out, the plant is also really awkward to draw. As I start trying to map it out on the page, I hear my mind complaining there's just too much of it. The flowers seem congested, cramped together. Even a single young stem can bear 20, 40, 60 of them. Scruffy clumps of buds as well as the open daisies. The plants stand in rigid triangles that lie awkwardly on the page. I make two drawings, the first focusing on a single stalk, the second faster, taking in a broader sweep. Upping the pace makes it harder. I'm working at the edge of my ability, moving the pen slightly ahead of what my brain can oversee, as if my hand is a child that's running just too far ahead. But though it reduces control, in an odd way this method can result in greater accuracy, since it's impossible to reflect too much or to fall back on any judgments of how the drawing is going. I'm drawing too fast for interference. As I struggle with the spacing of the buds around the stem, trying to accommodate them all, I'm impressed despite myself. The plant is really packing its flowers in, maximising its chances and its offering to insects too. Later, I learn it's one of the UK's top 10 plants for nectar production, and is the sole food source for at least 30 insect species, 7 of which are officially deemed scarce. One of them is the cinnabar moth. Do you know the black and red, the really beautiful moth? And you can see its black and yellow caterpillars on this plant often. Ragwort's generic name, Senecchio, means old man, a nod to its fluffy white seed heads. Its common names tend to be derogatory. Rag because of the ragged-looking leaves, stinking billy or mare's fart due to the unpleasant smell when bruised. Maybe ragwort will always be an outlier, holding itself apart, but for what it gives to invertebrates at the very least, it's a plant really worthy of respect. I forgot to invite you to have a sniff as it went round. Probably got about 5 more minutes? Is that okay? So, yeah, we'll maybe talk about plantain. That's a good one. Plantain is one I couldn't find in my garden, so obviously I had to do better with my. But plantain loves a grassy footpath, so I popped via George Square, the university area, and found a slightly dusty mildew example. So plantain, this is a small one, it can get quite a bit bigger, broadleaf plantain. This is one of those weeds that seems to hide in plain sight. It's a feature of almost any grassy path, well, a huge number of them, particularly footpaths. But it's easy to miss, and it makes me think of that phrase of, I think it's Richard Dawkins who talks about the anaesthetic of familiarity, when you're so familiar with something that you almost anaesthetise you do, or plant blindness, something like that. Yet plantains were noted newcomers for indigenous Americans when the plant arrived there along with the English settlers. In the 17th century, it spread so quickly over there that a contemporary observer announced that it was named Englishman's foot, as though produced by their treading, the treading of the white settlers. The plant's uncommon resilience means it seems actively to benefit from trampling, although that might be just that its competitors are more susceptible, so it kind of outcompetes them in its resilience. Along with docks and silverweed, plantains can be seen as part of what Richard Mabey, that brilliant nature writer, has called the global signatures of disturbance. So as you'll know, plants are often described and give us huge amounts of information about human migration and passage, and including, of course, colonial traffic. And there's been loads of research on this in the last few decades. And one of the artworks I've written about on this topic is by a Brazilian artist called Maria Teresa Alves, who about 10 years ago made a really interesting project called a ballast seed garden. I think it was called Seeds of Change, a ballast seed garden. And she made a few versions of it, one of which was in Bristol, which of course has deep links with the transatlantic slave trade and migrations associated with that. And I don't know if I didn't know much about ballast. I don't know if you guys are aware, but when the ships, until the early 20th century, when a ship would offload cargo, obviously it would become lighter, and they needed to recalibrate so that it would maintain the same, sit in the water at the same sort of height, so they had to add weight. So until the early 20th century, they would do that most often with soil, local soil, wherever the ship was docked. So you get a huge quantity of soil coming onto the ship, and that soil would obviously contain plants and seeds, often dormant seeds. And then when the ship went to the next place and docked there, ready to pick up cargo, the soil would be offloaded. So it was obviously an incredibly powerful way of spreading plants across the world. So this really interesting project that Maria Teresa and horticulturists to uncover seeds that had many of them been dormant for decades or centuries in local areas near the docks. And she got communities to help her germinate the seed and grow on the plants. And then she created this really, incredibly diverse garden on a barge in Bristol docks. It's a really, really interesting project. And she said, "I've come to see these seeds as witnesses to complicated stories between us as people." And I think that's a really interesting. Not only do plants tell stories about human migration, traffic, but they can do so in a way that we can experience with all our senses and all our bodies. So you can sit in a garden and you can kind of receive that information, not in a didactic way. Of course, we need that kind of information as well, but also in a kind of bodily experience way. So I think that's really a really interesting aspect of what these plants can tell us. Okay, I'm going to finish up now, and I think I'll finish by reading the last extract. So, about a 500-year-old piece of turf. I tried to find my postcard of this and I couldn't find it, but I do have a picture of this here in the magazine. So I'll show you. I'm sure many of you know this artwork. It's by Albrecht Dürer, and it's 500, just over 500 years old, which you wouldn't necessarily guess if you didn't know it. It's not a great reproduction, I have to say. So it's not quite as green as this, but it's in the Albertina Museum in Vienna. Slightly longer extract, and that will be the end of the talk. An occasional game I play at this time of year, this is 21st of September, when the grasses are in flower, is to search for a certain 500-year-old scrap of turf. An ordinary patch of grasses and weeds, dandelions, plantain, yarrow, maybe if I'm really lucky, a stem or two of burnt saxifrage. The patch I'm looking for is the great piece of turf, painted by Albrecht Dürer in 1503. The watercolour itself is in the Albertina Museum in Vienna, and I've never seen it in person. But a postcard of this favourite painting has kept me company above my desk for years, a kind of talisman. It's generally reckoned to be the first realistic depiction of plants in Western art. We could go into what realistic means, but for now. Where medieval herbs show plants as if placed flat upon a tabletop and viewed from above, Dürer's viewpoint is from down in the grass, ground level, even if pragmatically he lightly took a chunk of turf into his studio. Each plant seems to be drawn as it is at on a particular day, and each is interwoven with the next, an ecosystem in miniature. And then I talk a little bit more about the painting and its historical context, but I'm going to skip that for now. As I walk up to my children's school this morning, half looking out again for Dürer's turf, I wonder what it is about this painting that makes it so enduringly fascinating. It's more than the shock of finding something so acutely relatable from half a millennium ago, striking though that is. A drawing or painting records the time of its making, distills that time and holds it apart. If an ancient image shows us something that seems very present, something so intimately familiar that we might find it if we step outside right now, it can offer a route through the particular towards such timelessness. There are things we know but keep on needing to be shown. I know that such clusters of weeds and grass are coming up as they did 500 years ago, right now outside, and I can even believe that, pesticides notwithstanding, most will continue. But to see an image of such continuance is assuring on some deeply felt, non-intellectual level. And beyond this, beyond the continuance of the plants I crave being shown, is the continuance of witness. Because Dürer is only looking at weeds and nothing else is happening, the painting becomes as close as such an artwork might be able to get to a picture of nothing. The witnessing becomes something strangely pure, curiously visible. This is a painting of a patch of weeds, but in another sense, it's a painting of a fellow human looking, a painting of attention. Thanks so much for listening. Thank you.
So we have like 10 minutes for a Q&A now, if anybody has any questions, and if possible to kind of like repeat the questions into the mic for people watching online.
Oh, thanks, that's a great question. So the question is, the year structure of the book was that, did I always intend to write, or did that come about as I started, right? Yeah, so the book happened as I wonder if a lot of books start like this. You gradually realise that you're writing a book without planning to. So I was making a lot of drawings and increasingly found myself scribbling notes in the margins or on the back, or thinking, oh, I must write something about this, and recording a sort of slightly sheepish voice note in my phone on the way home. And then, yeah, it sort of crept up on me that this needed to be a book. It was becoming quite kind of all-consuming. So the structure of the book being over a year, I probably spent, 2 or 3 years working on it, and I do mention that at the end. So it's more like I collated it into a year from that longer span. Yeah, from being kind of more sporadic and gradual to then being quite kind of intense about it, I guess. Yeah, thanks. How did I come to weeds as my topic? So, in the at the beginning of the book, I kind of try and talk about this. It's a combination of things, and one of them was that I was in a period of my life where I was spending a lot of time on the ground. I don't know if there are any parents in the audience. I do know there's at least one. So I was spending a lot of time with young children on the ground, on the grass, and I was really missing my studio time and feeling very scattered. And I decided I couldn't work on kind of longer term sort of projects, but I would just go out with a notebook in my bag and try and kind of reconnect with my artist practice, I guess, by making a drawing when I could, like when the kids were playing or the baby was asleep or whatever. And I would, sometimes have like 20 seconds. A lot of the drawings are just a few lines and then somebody would start crying. But it was a nice way of just reconnecting. And to begin with, I just thought I'll just draw whatever's there on the ground. There's no time to kind of look out around or construct some sort of view or topic. And then gradually I became more and more interested in what these plants were. And around the same sort of time, I happened to be in the National Gallery in London, and I was in the gallery of the Italian Renaissance paintings, and I came upon this. I realised I was looking at the ground in the paintings and looking at the plants on the ground, and I realised it had become kind of a bit obsessive. And this one painting in particular, Piero della Francesca, really stunning image. Obviously a painting of a religious scene, but in the foreground, it's just the same shapes that I've been drawing, the plantain, the bindweed and things like that I'd been sort of grappling with in my notebook. They were just there, and I just felt that kind of really powerful sort of almost visceral connection, I guess, with that painting, and that this was a consistent element across time, and I just really felt that connection and thought, what other artists have made images of these plants, and that kind of kicked me off on a whole other research. And I think at that point it really became something I wanted to write a book about, because it wasn't just my experience of learning about the plants, it was much more of a kind of social cultural thing.
In your book and throughout work when you've been looking at these plants, have you made a conscious kind of, or have you consciously looked at these plants through the lens of anthropogenic habitats such as brownfields or waste sites, or has that not really entered into your mind necessarily if you're focusing on the plants themselves?
Thank you. So the question is about, have I focused on different habitats, like brownfield sites or whatever, or more focusing on the plants themselves? So I think writing the book as a narrative non-fiction does allow you to kind of touch on where you are at, so it kind of naturally does put you in place, roots each description in place. So I hope there is some of that. Sorry. I'm mostly writing in town. I live in Berwick-upon-Tweed, which some of you will know. It's 45 minutes on the train south, so it's pretty close climatically to here. And I haven't written about coastal plants. I wanted it to be kind of like an any town, at least a kind of British any town. But I do obviously venture out. I go on a lot of walks. So some of the settings are, woods. There's a lot by the river. Berwick has a really good path up the river from the estuary, and then I also write about places like shopping centres, or those kind of weird no places, or traffic roundabouts and things like that, which can be really interesting, especially for plants. Car parks, brilliant. Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. Thank you. So the question is, how did I decide which bits of my life to allow into the book? So kind of seep into the book, I guess, because as I've said, I didn't want to write a personal memoir, really. So I felt like, I think in a wider way, what I'm really interested in as an artist is making work that kind of acknowledges the messiness of the kind of art-life relationship, right? So very few of us operate like a sort of, grand man of art when we go to the studio, and no one disturbs us, and there's probably a helpful woman at home, obviously a woman making our dinner and dealing with any sort of admin. And I think obviously that's often, it would be, it feels like that would be lovely to live like that, but it's not the reality. And also it's often, I don't think that even makes for interesting art. I want to make art that kind of acknowledges the messiness and the blurred, the kind of permeability, and often allows some of that to come in. And so in terms of the bits of life that kind of I allowed into the book, I have kids. I was often with kids because going out for a walk is like the default option, often if you have children, particularly young children. And often it was kind of like a Brian Eno thing about chance methodology, how long a child is happily playing, that's your determinant for how long the drawing is going to take, things like that. So it can be quite nice to just kind of go with that. But then also, kind of, I guess, more seriously, some of the themes that I wanted to write about connected with attention, digital distraction, and things like how images, if you are so used to assessing everything on a screen, how that changes an image you make off screen. Those were things that I was wanted to write, again, not academically, but from my own kind of lived experience. So I guess that is my personal life coming in, but it's hopefully in relation to a topic that's of widespread interest. Okay, thank you. Hi. That's such an interesting question. So, it's really hard to summarise other people's words, isn't it? A connection with the devaluing of plants and the devaluing of predominantly women's work in using these plants in healing. Would that be about it? I mean, that is such a fascinating area, and I'm sure you're right. It's not an area that I've spent a lot of time particularly focused on in my research. I know there are lots of books that probably deal with that in a really interesting way. And of course, does anyone know? My mind's gone blank. But I think there are quite a lot of. There's one somebody wrote about, kind of used the word witch in the title. I'm sure they're in the shop. Mohammed might know. He's pointing at something. Expert bookseller, no doubt they'll tell you. But yeah, I'm sure you're right. And I think also. I think that's part of our plant blindness, isn't it? In terms of, now that we don't have a use for things, it's always that extractive mindset, isn't it? So that we don't, chickweed, we would have used it to feed the chickens. Now that most of us don't have chickens, we don't see chickweed. It's all connected, isn't it? What we can create value out of, therefore, what we see. Yeah, such an interesting. Is that something you're working on yourself? Oh. Thank you for the question.
I am afraid that's all we have time for as far as Q&A, but Anna has very kindly agreed to stick around for a little bit for a wee signing afterwards, so if you have any more questions as well.
And I have weedy bookmarks, if anybody, on weed seed paper. Thank you so much, everybody, and anybody online as well. Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
Thank you so much.